Good morning. I want to welcome all of you who gathered here this morning for an important announcement in working with the City of Reedley and its elected leaders, its mayor and city council and city manager that's well respected throughout our valley here. And the County of Fresno. We want to express our sincere thanks. Since day one, my top priority has always been to, when this issue rose, to protect public health and safety. Public health and safety. When the city manager, Nicole Ziva, reached out to our office, we quickly responded and brought out the federal partners and led a federal investigation that resulted in the arrest of Jia Zhu, the owner of this lab that we later determined was an illegally operated lab. In collaboration with the House Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party that is doing a host of investigations for influence that Chinese investments have made that we have many concerns about. We launched an investigation that specifically looked into the circumstances facing the City of Reedley. Following the investigation, a release of a bipartisan support, which we can make reference to those of you if you'd like to look at the report, outlined gaps in federal law and regulations surrounding highly infectious agents and contaminants that were contained in this laboratory. And that's why we get back to this is about public health and safety. And the City of Reedley is to be commended for their way in which they responded and acted. And that's why we are taking the lead to address this matter so that it doesn't happen in the future to other communities like the City of Reedley. A well-established community here in our San Joaquin Valley that has a rich history that goes over 100 years. So we were concerned that this example not occur nationwide in other communities. So as a result of that, today I'm proud to release the announcement for the introduction of House Bill H.R. 8065. That's H.R. 8065. The title of the legislation is to prevent illegal laboratories and protect public health. That's the title of the bill. I think it's telling it's noontime in Reedley, which is a good thing. People are breaking for lunch. So, once again, H.R. 8065 is to prevent illegal laboratories and Protect Public Health Act. This legislation would do the following. Require sellers of highly infectious agents to keep a logbook of all sales and maintain those records for at least 5 years, including identification of purchase. It would also implement regular evaluations of highly contaminant laboratories in the United States and designate a single federal official to lead the overview. When we got into this, what we discovered is that there were multiple agencies, both at the federal and the state level, that had maybe some responsibility, but not any direct responsibility. So by creating a public health and biosecurity team, we'll serve as a liaison to state and local agencies regarding laboratory, biosafety, and biosecurity questions, so that the highly contagious diseases that were contained in this laboratory would be properly monitored. And the test kits that they had here, not to mention the over 1,000 laboratory rats that were also contained here for bio research, supposedly. This will fix address the concerns that were listed in the congressional report, and it will allow monitoring of high containment labs, which results in limited regulations over labs and how they receive federal funding in the future. This lab in previous reiterations had, I believe, received some funding from the payroll protection program. So anyway, we want to conduct a feasibility study to determine a database for highly contaminant labs that are accessible at the state and local level. That's important because the county made it very clear they had no record of this, and the lab had been in Fresno and then came here, and then they were trying to move again. This case in Reedley, let's be clear, this case in Reedley show how bad actors can take advantage of our public health system for their own gain. And we're still not certain what their own gain may have been. But the legislation is a first step in closing the gap in federal law, which was identified by the investigation that took place, especially when it comes to laboratory oversight. I want to thank the efforts and give a shout out to Jesselyn Harper. Jess, where are you? This is the person here in the city of Reedley that deals with public works that really discovered this lab as a result, and she'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, when she was just doing her job and found a discharge coming out of this warehouse building and thought, something's not right here. And thank you, Jess, and we'll give you a round of applause for your effort. And that was simply because a hose was sticking outside of this warehouse. So thanks to you, the city responded immediately to take proper measures to keep our community safe. And then, of course, the city looked for support and help. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my friend Nicole Ziba, one of the really truly public servants here, not only for the city of Reedley, but really an example of what an excellent city manager does for communities throughout our valley and throughout our state. Working with her when she called our office, and Joe Prado, who I've worked with Fresno County over the years. These have been critical partners in trying to not only address this case, but to try to prevent future measures like this from taking place in Fresno County and elsewhere throughout our valley or across our nation. So that's what this legislation does. We also have two of the members of this Reedley City Council here, a very strong and responsible city council with its mayor. We have Councilwoman Mary Fast, Mary, who has served with honor and distinction for over 12 years for the city of Reedley, and Scott Friesen, who has also served the city of Reedley with distinction as well. So I'm honored to have good representatives here. I'd like to introduce Nicole for comments that the city manager may have, and then we'll have Joe Prada from the County of Fresno, and then we'll take any questions that you, members of the press, have. Nicole Ziba, City Manager of Reedley. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today is such an exciting day for the city of Reedley, and really, I'd like to say an exciting day for this country. It was almost a year ago to this day, May 2nd, we were just commenting on the date, that we were in this very room filled with various state and federal officials. We had the CDC, we had the FDA, we had State California Department of Public Health, we had DTSC, you name it, the alphabet soup was in this room talking about what in the world we had and what we were going to do about it. As most of you know, the story came out quite a while ago. It was an effort in futility for a small city like Reedley to call up to the state or to call the CDC to try to get assistance. But one call, within an hour of one call to Congressman Costa's office, all of those agencies were at our beck and call assisting us. They did not know what we had. We did not know what we had, and we had to follow a process that ultimately was very successful in abating a public health hazard. So it's an exciting day today because Congressman Costa assured me from the very beginning that we would not be alone and he walked us through this process hand in hand, getting us every resource we needed. And as we spoke, it became abundantly clear to us that these gaps in federal law, gaps in state law, could allow the 850 I Street, the Reedley Lab, to happen anywhere across this country. And I begged him, don't let what's happening in Reedley happen in other places. And he gave me his promise that he would not let us down. He would work on a solution. And so today is such an exciting day because the solution is in black and white in front of us. It plants the flag to really harden biosecurity in America from these types of situations. It allows for a single point of contact. If any other city or county anywhere in this country runs into this ever again, they don't have to go through the trouble that Reedley went through. They will have a single point of contact that will open up those doors for them, anything that's needed to assist them. That alone could have really dramatically sped through the process for Reedley. It allows the tracking, or forces really, the tracking of sales of infectious diseases. You know, to this very day, I have members of our community and others who ask, how could this have happened? How could we not know that the gentleman in question had dengue fever, malaria, COVID, HIV? How could all this happen and we not know this? And so this actually puts a logbook together and traces and tracks those purchases so that we don't end up with a situation like in Reedley. So this legislation does some very important things. It's a start of a much longer process. We didn't know that a situation like Reedley could exist until it did exist. Now that we do, we can plant that flag to start closing those loopholes in federal law. And as we learn more, we can strengthen and strengthen and strengthen and add to this law. I'm so excited about what I read in black and white with this law. And I stood in front of many of you months ago and I was urging Congress not to let this go, that we have a problem in our country that can be fixed. And it's a nonpartisan issue. It doesn't matter if you are a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, a Green. It doesn't matter what you are. You don't want deadly pathogens next door to your family and loved ones in the communities that you represent. If there ever was a nonpartisan issue that should be able to be adopted in DC and passed in DC, it's this one. The writers of this legislation were keen to capture detail. They were keen to avoid any politics. And I just really want to thank those who worked so hard and so diligent on this legislation. It is a solid piece of legislation that plants the flags and gets us started down a path for better safety in America. So thank you, Congressman Costa. It has been an unbelievable journey, and honestly, I wouldn't have wanted to do it with anybody else but you. At this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to Joe Prado, the Assistant Public Health Director, who again, just an exceptional partner throughout this entire process. Were it not for Fresno County and Joe's help, I still don't know where we'd be today as well. So Joe, thank you for your help, and I'll yield the microphone.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everybody. I think there is a moment of reflection for me today, and that reflection is gratitude. Like Nicole mentioned, a year ago, we're in here having a debriefing of what we were dealing with across the street. And what I appreciate that Congressman Costa actually listened to the locals. And you see that in the legislation, that the issues that we dealt with during this Reedley incident is actually in the legislation today. So I appreciate Congressman Costa doing that. I appreciate City of Reedley, the leadership that City of Reedley had to have in this unprecedented time. There was no playbook on what to do with these infectious materials, but they had the courage to say, not in my backyard, and we're gonna protect the public's health. That took courage to do that. So I wanna acknowledge City of Reedley's, their city council, their city manager, and their staff that really supported those efforts. And then I also have to thank our County of Fresno, our Board of Supervisors supporting us throughout this response. Our County Administrative Office, when there were difficult times and decisions needed to be made, they were there walking alongside the Department of Public Health. I also want to thank Dr. Vora, the health officer, he wrote the first order that allowed us to get into that building and find out what was going on. And we were able to determine there was public health threats in that building. That took courage to do. There was no precedent in the state of California. There was no precedent for a health officer ever doing this. But he had the courage to say yes. And the team from the Department of Public Health that supported those efforts. Thank you very much. That's the moment of gratitude I have for everyone that really responded to this public health incident here. And I just want to just focus a little specificity on the law that's being presented today. The logbook that's referenced for the infectious materials that a seller would have to do, that is an asset, a tool we did not have during this response. That is significant for us to know what is in a building. What are we walking into potentially? Who owns this? Who is the business owner? What credentials do they have? That logbook is going to be key in any type of future response. And what you're seeing in the legislation within the feasibility study, you're seeing reference to Homeland Security, CDC. You're seeing all these federal agencies, they're going to collaborate. They're going to have to share information to really do a good feasibility study as well. That, I think, is going to be significant. That is going to be an asset and tool we did not have at the beginning. So when this legislation does pass, so I'm an optimist here, that's going to give the locals a new tool and asset. And at the same time, what you see in the body of this legislation is the local voice. You still see the locals will speak into a response. And that's what I appreciate about Congressman Costa's proposed legislation. It still has a local focus on it and still bringing in all those federal assets to be able to respond to this public health incident. So I appreciate today for everybody coming here today, but really to really be able to say this story a little bit more. And I now defer my time to Congressman Costa.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Nicole. The report by the Joint Select Committee made a series of recommendations, but I made it very clear to the committee that number one, this would be a bipartisan effort. Number two, that I wanted to have the input locally from those who really had to deal with the crisis firsthand. And Nicole, and as a city manager of Reedley and her city council, and Joe Prado working with Dr. Vora, as he noted, we're dealing with a situation that really had not been dealt with before, not only here in California, but anywhere else around the country that we are aware of. And you know, this is just coming off of the pandemic we had with COVID, and we learned, at least I hope we learned, a number of lessons. One of the lessons that I made very clear is you never want to politicize a health crisis. You never want to politicize a health crisis. There's just no room to do that. We're talking about protecting public health and safety. So those were the rules that we established in writing this legislation. And we got a tremendous amount of input from the city of Reedley, the city manager and her staff, the council, and from the county of Fresno, as Joe noted with Dr. Vora, because they were having to deal with all sorts of situations, and we had federal and state agencies that weren't talking to one another. And so now we hope we've developed a process in this legislation as we move forward that will provide the kind of support necessary for communities like Reedley and counties like Fresno. So with that said, I will, and my friends here, will be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a question. Obviously, Fresno County has their own ordinance as well to address this that cities can kind of sign on to. So how will those work together with this new legislation that's being introduced?
No, thank you for that question. I think the way I see the legislation today, the ordinance, part of our evaluation will be the logbook, making sure the individual that is actually purchasing infectious materials, we're going to want access to the logbook to be able to confirm that and be able to confirm the business owner or an employee of them is actually in the logbook. That wasn't built into the specific ordinance, but we did leave some ambiguity in the ordinance to be able to the Department of Public Health will be able to add on whatever it deemed necessary to be able to investigate and look into the labs.
And so now that this legislation has been introduced, what's the timeline looking like? If everything goes as planned, how soon will House Bill HR 8065 be signed into law?
Well, you're asking a question that is never easy to answer when you talk about Congress and our legislative agenda. Obviously, we've been challenged with our budget. We've been challenged with a series of critical pieces of legislation affecting our country and the world we live in. I would hope, though, with the bipartisan support, having said that, that we can get action. I've spoken with the chair and the ranking member of the House Committee that this will be referred to, and we hope we can get it scheduled for a hearing here within the next couple of months, and whether or not it's possible to get it off the House floor before our August recess remains to be seen, but we'll keep you and the press updated, as well as our partners, and they are partners, the City of Reedley and the County of Fresno, updated on the progress of the legislation. I mean, ideally, I'd like to get it signed. You still have to get it through the Senate, and I'm reaching out to our California senators to see if we can get an interest to possibly get a Senate version of this legislation introduced. And that's the best way to move with legislation, if you can have a vehicle in the Senate and one in the House. And if they're the same, you can ensure that the language reflects that, and that allows for a more expedited movement in the process. But the schedule, our legislative schedule, runs until the end of September, and then we have time aside for elections. So, you know, it's an ambitious timeline. We're going to do our best to expedite it as fast as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to be more definitive, but I don't control all of the schedule, is the point.
Of course, everyone wants to know, things are down now with the lab. Last time I think we talked to Ziba, there was, a few things left in there, so where are we at right now with the 850 I Street building?
Nicole?
I appreciate the question, and as most of you know, we do have somebody sitting in the Fresno County Jail awaiting a court date, which we understand is coming up here. Most of what was in 850 I Street is gone. So what remains there right now are embargoed medical test kits. Everything else has been removed from that building, and my great expectation is that once that trial occurs, those test kits will be removed and the property owner will be able to return to their property.
You said that this is a first step in addressing the gaps that were found. What comes next?
Well, you have to get the legislation signed into law before the federal authorities are then required to respond. Some of the gaps that was referenced here, by the county ordinance, that's already currently law. So to the degree that those gaps existed here in Fresno County, that has been addressed. But in terms of nationwide, obviously we have to pass the legislation. But we have basically alerted the federal agencies, Homeland Security and other agencies that dealt with this, that illegal labs currently have a great leeway and little oversight in terms of their operations. And this really is a national security issue beyond being a public health and safety matter. We are being attacked daily by our adversaries in China and Russia through the internet and through social media in ways that undermine our financial security, our electrical grid, and other ways in which foreign countries are trying to undermine the stability and the security of the United States. This is an area where, in fact, they could also pursue activities that would accrue to the harm of our country. So we learned a lot of things after 9/11. We had silos and agencies weren't talking to each other. And as a result of 9/11, we thought we made significant progress in correcting that. But this is another area clearly that needs to be addressed. you have anything you wanted to add to that in terms of the gaps?
Yeah, I think in the legislation, a key piece is the feasibility study. I think the results of that feasibility study will allow the United States to take a step back and how do we address these high containment labs, the biosafety levels 3 and 4? What does that look like? So I'm really curious to see the results of that feasibility study. I think that will address some potential issues there.
So let's just kind of talk about, obviously if we had some of these things, it wouldn't have happened, but.
I'm sorry, if we had what?
If we had, this legislation, this wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened, but can you just talk about how maybe if you had a logbook, how things would have looked different, kind of in this whole investigation?
I know, which,
I'll
which
start.
one? That'd be
I'll
good.
start with that. So having this type of structure in place is the communication with CDC, Homeland Security is going to be key. What should we be looking for? What is happening around the world that we need to pay extra attention to here locally? That's, I think, the key piece of what that does. Is there an inordinate amount of infectious material being purchased by someone? What does that look like? Has this someone been vetted? What part of the country is that business in? What part are they near any type of federal or state facilities? That is the lens we do not have today. We have no idea. So that's what I'm looking forward to by having that level of data available to the locals, working with the feds sharing that information, us really providing that local view of what we're seeing here, because it could be a local issue, it could be a hazardous materials violation. Well, now let's look at this other database that's available to see if there's any potential connection as well.
And let me just mention as Nicole comes up, this person that created what we determined was an illegal lab, the only thing they had to do was to apply for a city permit to open a business, right?
Correct, business license, yeah. I like the question that you asked, because when I'm speaking to groups, the question I always get is, well, what is this gentleman on trial for with regards to the infectious diseases? And as most of you know from following this case, there are no charges against him for the infectious diseases because there are no laws in place right now. It has shocked people when I've mentioned that we have learned you can buy infectious diseases on the internet. You can import infectious diseases with a permit, but once they're here in America, you can trade, sell, purchase infectious diseases. So to have a logbook where these things can be tracked and traced is critical. To have a law on the books that allows us to deal with labs when we discover them, by no means do I think a law is going to keep the bad actors from doing what they want to do, but by having a law on the books, it allows us authority to go in and deal with those bad actors and to deal with them much quicker. And to have a single source, a single federal authority who can parse out which agency has the authority to deal with whatever is found is critical. Because as I mentioned, sitting in this room with multiple federal and state agencies, all of which had small slivers of authority, but no one had overarching authority to deal with what we had found. So to have a single federal source that could point us in the right direction. There's been a lot of conversation about the CDC and why did they not test what they found on site. And the CDC in a hearing in late November in front of Congress mentioned that her authority was very limited. But does some other federal agency, should some other federal agency have been in this room then? And that single federal source that is written into this legislation would have been able to guide us then. So this is a critical law to have on the books so that we can deal with labs that pop up that may or may not look like Reedley, that may or may not be worse than Reedley. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's important to underline Nicole's comments. Whether we're talking about the Center for Disease Control, whether we're talking about the Federal Food and Drug Administration, whether we're talking about Homeland Security, it's important that there be a coordination. And we're looking at subsequent legislation, working with the state of California and other entities that would provide the support to train officers, because we're very lucky that Jesselyn here is a very observant city employee who took upon herself to make the extra effort. But generally speaking, cities of the size of Reedley and certainly smaller and other communities across the country don't have the resources, don't have the ability to train city personnel on how you deal with code enforcement, as an example, and what to look for when you're talking about infectious, highly infectious diseases, pathogens that might be contained in such a lab. Any other questions?
I have one for Justin. The hose coming out of the building originally was like about 6.5 feet, 6 feet high. How harder would it have been to find if it was like lower to the ground? Because there was a lot of weeds there and things like that. And I know that seeing a hose coming out of a wall that high was a red flag, but if it had been lower, it could have been a little harder to detect.
So there were still violations present on the property other than the hose. The hose is what really gave me the authority to request an inspection. The individuals habitating or using the warehouse would have already been a code enforcement violation due to land usage and no active business license on file. So there still would have been a possibility, but the garden hose really did give us the authority to go in to inspect a plumbing violation. So we are very lucky that in that portion of the building, the hose needed to be as high as it was to access the room. But there were still code enforcement violations that could have led to this situation as well, which is also why code enforcement was so critical to this type of case.
And so you guys gave us this discussion draft of the legislation. It's pretty detailed, has the requirements and so forth, even consequences. I did take a brief look. Can you briefly describe, let's say this legislation is passed, what would the consequences be if they fail to follow the requirements?
Well, the federal authority will require certain requirements under the federal law that can be enforced by the appropriate federal agencies. So that gives us the ability to create a standard level that we currently don't have in the law. And to create, number two, an ability to monitor and know what's there. This log that Mr. Prado and City Manager spoke about is part of the tools necessary to crack down on any sort of operations of illegal labs. And so, I mean, this legislation will have its hearings before the appropriate policy committees, and I'm certain that there will be recommendations on how we can improve it. As I said, we don't have a set of laws that really deal with the gaps that we discovered as a result of this illegal lab operating here, within blocks from the city hall, within blocks from schools, and really with infectious diseases in which the community here became, and deservedly so, very concerned, as they should be. And so we don't want to let this happen again. But I suspect that the legislation will, as any good piece of legislation, people will have other recommendations and suggestions, and we'll certainly take them into account to ensure that we get the very best protection for public health and safety. That's job number one. Any other questions? You've been terrific. Let me once again thank the City of Reedley, its city manager and staff, and the council and the mayor for your due diligence, and the county of Fresno, the county board of supervisors. Please give them my regards, as well as Dr. Borja and Joe. We've worked together during the pandemic with Dr. Borja, and we've worked on a host of other issues. But this is a good example of how you can be effective when you work at the local, county, and in this case, federal level. And by the way, we did get the state involved, and so Dr. Gali and the state of California and Health and Human Services. So there, once we got everybody's attention, then we developed, I think, a good level of coordination and cooperation. But the city council here, and I called a couple different times, I mean, this room was full with concerned citizens and wondering, you know, and there were some, and I said earlier, you know, I hope we learned during the pandemic that you never politicize a health crisis. And this had the potential to be a health crisis here in the city of Reedley. And there were some that really, you know, were deservedly alarmed, but there were some that I think were, you know, looking at the politics of it, and frankly, that we overcame that. And so that's the important thing, I think, and I just want to thank, and now we got to work on the legislation. We got to do our best to try to get it to the president's desk, I hope before the end of this year. And we got to work with the Senate. So that's what I'm doing, and these are my partners, and we're all in it together. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jocelyn. You did very good. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and being brave enough to push this.
But I'm gonna make it. What's he doing after?